the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Good to be back again. This week I have Ben Moore joining me. Welcome along, Ben. How are you?
Good, thank you. Yeah, really happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me along to have a chat.
Oh, fantastic to have you on the show. Maybe you can start with a little intro on where you fit into this big, wide universe of technology and tech reporting.
Absolutely. I've been reporting on the IT channel for about 4-ish years now. And this year I am leading the charge on launching a few tech-focused outlets in New Zealand. One for the channel, CRN, one for enterprise technology, IT news, and one for non-techie business leaders called Digital Nation. Excellent.
Oh, well, we'll look forward to seeing that progress over the months ahead.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. It's a lot of work so far and ahead, but I'm enjoying it thoroughly.
Fantastic. Well, lots to delve into today, but let's jump straight in. Now, I spent the weekend down in Southland, Invercargill, and Invercargill's been a little bit in the news as far as data centres are concerned and connectivity. So we see the Overseas Investment Office, has given the big tick to the land purchase there for the data grid data centre, and I guess it's been reported as a $1 billion investment. I think that the land is a pretty small slice of that overall picture. What's your view on this? It's the bit that caught me by surprise, and what I saw in the NBR on it was that it looks to be 100% offshore owned as far as data grid is concerned. Now that I think Malcolm Dick had sold his stake.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's not entirely a surprise because I guess New Zealand often doesn't have the amount of the economic capacity to pour into something like a data center, which is why a lot of our data centers are being built by overseas companies. What I think is really cool about this particular data center is that it's using some of the renewable energy left over from the aluminium smelter. So aiming to be the first ANZ truly carbon neutral data center, unlike some others which might use carbon offsetting. This is going to be hopefully entirely run by renewables. So interesting in terms of a huge cash injection into the New Zealand economy that shouldn't have too much of an effect on our carbon footprint, and potentially could help to boost the economy a little bit in terms of the companies looking to invest in having data center capacity in New Zealand. So
yeah. I mean, I think the whole move is very, very good. And I always find it interesting looking at where the investments come from. What does that say about those in New Zealand that have got funds to invest, their foresight, and a whole range of other things that you could sort of delve into and discuss and debate. But ultimately, when businesses are looking for investment, there's a balance in terms of how much effort do you put in if it's going to slow you down to look for investments in New Zealand versus if there are folks that are queuing up internationally and willing to go ahead and provide you the funds. And I guess we've heard a bit from Peter Beck over the years in terms of Rocket Lab and I think some of the challenges, frustrations, et cetera, from his perspective in terms of New Zealand investment. But yeah, look, this is something that I think is very good for us as a country to go ahead.
Yeah. And
hopefully we get sort of smarter and smarter around being able to invest into these things that require a bit of a a futurist mindset and ability to really look out and longer term to see the importance of these investments. But it's really pleasing to see that we are getting more data centres in New Zealand and the ability to support the hyperscale providers, the Microsofts and AWSs, and we've already seen that. I think we know Next DC out of Australia are building for Microsoft. There's DCI. What's the other one?
Canberra Data Centres is investing as well.
Yeah, so there's most of it's happening in Auckland at this stage, but very, very good for us to have that diversity as a nation, in terms of we don't want all our data centres built near where I guess it's extinct volcanoes around Auckland.
Well, exactly.
We hope they all are, but you just don't want all your eggs in one basket location wise when it comes to these matters. So it's encouraging, and of course data can be in Australia, which isn't too far off as well. But having that diversity around New Zealand is I think really encouraging.
And if you look at the tragedy in Tonga as well, and it just took that horrific event and with all of its horrific consequences, but one of them was that the subsea cable got cut and suddenly there was no connectivity. And so in New Zealand, if you've got all these companies relying on cloud-based business applications and things like that, and it's all in Australia, and then we lose that connectivity, suddenly that's a huge chunk of our digital economy that's going to be hamstringed there. So it's nice to have this stuff coming on onshore.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, as much as possible, and if the redundant options are onshore as well, then all the better. On the Tonga situation, I did get a communique through saying that that Tonga and Hawaii had come to, sorry, not Hawaii, I'm thinking of Pacific, who provides satellite connectivity, and they helped out with the last time there was a cable damage to Tonga 3 years ago, back in January 2019, and they've come to an agreement. So there's a gigabit or more of bandwidth available to Tonga until the cable comes back on. That number itself, when I saw it in the email, was a gigabit. That's how much I get. That's how much I get. Or most of us will be getting to our homes, right, or not far off it, and some of us have a good chunk more than that, and important to recognise the difference between what can be done over fibre and what can be done over satellite connections. But at least they've got an agreement, and it's going to be a little bit easier for communications. I haven't heard confirmation that fibre is fixed yet. So have you heard anything further on that front?
No. The last I heard, it was worse than expected and going to take a long time. So, which is unfortunate, but that's good news with the satellite, because there's probably going to be a lot of happy expat Tongans who are even just being able to get that text back home will be huge for them. Yeah,
and didn't look like Starlink were in a position to quickly and easily provide connectivity. So little bit of a challenge there, but something that I think we'll have more diversity from that satellite perspective in the future, and that will make things a little bit easier, I'm sure. But it's a good highlight for New Zealand. Look, it is possible to lose your fibre connectivity. Of course, we've got a fair bit more diversity in terms of cables connecting New Zealand to the rest of the world, so would be harder for that to happen. But also, if things move ahead in Southland as we expect, then there could be a fibre link that also connects from that part of the country out to at least Australia and probably South America. So
that was one of the interesting things about the data grid project as well, is that Remy Galasso, who owns some of the data grid company was talking about how it's the potential for exporting data back to Australia as well. Green data that will be powered by renewables, which is, I think, there was an analyst company said something recently about the greenness of data is going to become more and more of a driving factor for how people are deciding to invest, where they're deciding to locate their information. So, yeah, on the whole, a good move. Can't wait to see the first fully Kiwi-owned data center, hyperscale data center in New Zealand. Hopefully, it's not too far away, but. These companies, they've done this 100 times. They've built out these data centers. They've got it down to a science, and they can do it quickly and efficiently. So it makes sense that they're the first ones building over here.
Yeah. Now, also in New Zealand news, Hnry, which is a startup that helps the self-employed.
Yes.
In fact, you told me earlier you're a customer of theirs.
I am. Yeah, I've been a customer for a few years now.
Yeah.
And I fully rate them.
Right.
I think they're fantastic. I'm not a numbers guy. I don't like having to figure out how much I have to take out to manually set up all of these things. So for me, it's 1% of what I earn. I invoice through Hnry. They sort the payment, they sort the tax, the KiwiSaver, and everything. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Hnry actually.
Well, it seems like they've got some other fans because we hear that they've raised $16 million from Left Lane Capital in the US, and that is going to really, give them a boost for a significant move forward. Interesting that their revenue has gone up, massively over the past sort of 18 months or so, and they're listed as one of New Zealand's largest accountancies, basically accounting firms, which sort of makes sense when you're delivering something like an accounting service, really en masse from the cloud, and you've got this incredible product that allows you to serve a lot of people for a reasonably low price. As you said, simplicity, or as you said, 1% is their fee, and I think that brings a real simplicity to their offering, and you look at it from a whole lot of different angles, and I think you compared it to what it might cost you to be with Xero versus Hnry are really customized to your particular scenarios. So you get a lot of benefits of that, but you get that simplicity. It's 1% of whatever you bill out that they take. So they automatically benefit as more customers come on board, as those customers bill more. Inflation and so on, they never have to put their, in theory, they never have to put their fee up. And I would hope that's something that they can stick to, is this 1%.
Yeah.
Because I think that simplicity piece is very, very powerful. As soon as they go 1.1 or 1.5 or to any other variation on that, I think they lose something that is just inherently simple and special about their platform.
Totally. But and that 1% scales with you as well. So if I earn, if I only bill $100 in the entire year, then I'm paying $1 for all of their services, which is fantastic. But as I've scaled up to, I had to bill all of my hours through Hnry, and it just was fine. It was easy. And since I've joined them, they've added currency support for so many countries now. We were just looking at it before, but I remember when they introduced AUD, it was kind of a big deal. And so I wouldn't be surprised if they don't start trying to tap into that Aussie market and try to make some global tax waves because they've got a great system, I think. It's exciting. So they're now sitting at a valuation around 100 million New Zealand dollars, I believe. So they've done very well over their roughly five years since they started. So it's definitely a story I think it would be great for us to go into a little bit more detail on.
and we'll look at doing that in the future. But yeah, always exciting to see, our New Zealand startups doing well and growing. We talked about local investment versus international investment. This is funds coming from offshore, but we should recognise that there can be some real benefits to those funds, coming from offshore as well. And certainly, my hope will be that Hnry becomes very much a global cloud-based accounting firm rather than with that. I'm not sure what their breakdown is at the moment. We know they serve the New Zealand market, and do you know what markets they're in overseas?
I don't
New Zealand
actually.
and Australia, or
I know it's tricky when you're doing some stuff like becoming basically an accountant for someone, because you have to be so localized to the local tax laws and things like that. I'm not 100% sure if they serve people in Australia. But I do know that I can bill to Australia, and they sort out all of that side of everything. So no worrying about currency conversion, no worrying about having to think about what it means and GST and having to deal with the issues of importing money to New Zealand. So
it's just all done for you. That's great. All right. So, look, hopefully we will have a lot more, stories on New Zealand startups this year, and that they keep going up nicely in value. Actually, there was another one that was a New Zealand one that just has come out in the last week or two that I forgot to mention, and let me have a look at who that was, if I can see it.
It's always great to see these startups in New Zealand doing so well, because there's so much clever stuff happening, and software is so universal that we're almost set up to be a powerhouse for software development and cloud-based development globally. And it's happening. You see, look at these companies that we're producing, like Hnry, Xero, of course. And
Moxion was the name. So Moxion were a big winner at the High Tech Awards last year, if I recall correctly, and been attracting significant interest. They began in 2015, and Autodesk have stepped in and acquired them. As a small investor in Puna Kaiki Fund, they've now exited from Puna Kaiki Fund, but apparently that has been a reasonably good return for Puna Kaiki Fund investors.
Absolutely.
Very, very, very nice. So I like Puna Kaiki Fund because they're accessible to there's, I don't know how many investors they've got now, probably heading towards 1,000 investors, but the everyday people have had a chance to invest in Puna Kaiki Fund, and then they're putting money into supporting good, innovative Kiwi startups, which is fantastic. So so well done, Moxion and their team. Their software was really a huge boon to filmmakers and helping in the filmmaking process. So
which goes to show, with Hnry, it's kind of quite a broad section of people who would use it, from full-time contractors to people who do side gigs. But Moxion is such a hyper-specific thing that they just done really well, allowing for live review of raw footage remotely, and that's basically what they did, and to be so hugely successful. So it's so interesting to see how both sides of these software worlds, of the hyper-specific and the kind of broad and powerful, can both be really successful from New Zealand as well.
Well, they shared some figures around the amount of revenue that our self-employed earn in New Zealand. I think it was listed at 30 billion. So Hnry indicate that around 15% of New Zealanders earn at least some of their income, independently, self-employed type basis, and that puts about about 30 billion of that flows through the economy. So in a scenario where they maybe picked up say a third of that at their 1%, then that'd be 100 million a year that they could bring in the future. So a valuation at 100 million, that's probably going to go up if they can replicate what what they're doing with a lot more customers in the New Zealand market, and can spread that into for instance Australia, UK, maybe US. The US being probably a lot more complex with
state by state.
Every state, right, adds quite some complexity. But Xero have been gaining their traction in the US market, and are well regarded there. So let's see what's possible for Hnry.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what they do.
Now on to other topics. There was one thing that came up that caught my attention. It was a heading in Wired magazine, and the headline read, "What should be considered a crime in the metaverse?" Now that sort of sparked some immediate thinking for me. And anyone that's interested can certainly go and find that on the Wired website, and it delved into, I guess it went back to what we had before the metaverse in terms of gaming and these different virtual worlds where I remember in the early days of computing we had these sort of text-based type games, and there'd be some sort of fantasy world that you're in, and you could type commands and different things would happen. And the article goes into sort of describing a not a very nice scenario there. In a game or a multi-user domain, as they were called.
MUDs.
Yeah.
I'm tangentially
back in the day.
I had some friends who have been in MUDs, as they call them.
Okay.
So it's very text-based, very role-play based, and very community-based. So almost to those to the metaverse, what text-based RPGs are to World of Warcraft or whatever.
And for those, I guess, once those things sort of moved away from, their earliest iteration, which was just a local game on a local, computer, so you got that community type of aspect and so on. There's obviously the ability to impact other people, and this particular story goes into some shocking things that happened within the platform, and able to leave users feeling abused, violated, etc., outside of the platform. And so that was kind of the angle, a big part of the angle that this piece went into. But I think that there's so many more things that we can think about in terms of how should we structure these things? And of course, there are so many games, and in fact the metaverse type games, if you want to call them that, and I guess we're to a degree still defining what the metaverse is and will be. But I look at even kids games like Roblox and so on, where people are entering this virtual world and they can trade things and buy things and so on. That would to me fall into that category, VR type games and so on. there's a fair bit of killing that goes on in these platforms, right?
Well, that was the interesting thing from that article, wasn't it? About the concept of murder is morally acceptable within so many games because there is no true death.
Yeah.
But then some of the other things that people can do to each other, and you see this in the censorship they've had to do of things like Roblox, where they've had to stop people from being able to say certain things to other users because it's cruel, because it's bigoted, and so that there becomes that interesting kind of moral juxtaposition of murder. We do murder, that's fine because it's not true, but actually the things that you do online that do have real world consequences, we do actually have to be thinking about those things. And you were saying earlier how that is kind of reflected in the blockchain and the other development of the digital world, NFTs and the theft of NFTs and the fraud that can happen with Ethereum and the ransomware with Bitcoin, and it all ties together into this question of how do we regulatorily and morally navigate this new world that we're entering into, which is fascinating.
It's going to be a very, very interesting time, and I don't know how well we're going to do with it. Usually legislation itself takes a long time to catch up with where technology takes us. Sometimes there is existing legislation that can handle certain scenarios. And I was, I don't know if it was someone I was speaking to or something I was reading, but I was hearing about, one child's experience with Roblox and how basically they were scammed out of, all these things that they'd spent a long time acquiring on the platform. They were sucked in, classic sort of online con, and just do this, give me your stuff and I'll give you XYZ in return. Oh, that sounds good. Went ahead and did it, and of course, lost all of their assets and didn't get anything back in return. And there's, so many of these types of scams and stories we hear about. And then, as you say, there's a lot of things that happen when it comes to NFTs and cryptocurrencies that you wonder, where should the lines be drawn? We look at the stock market, and when it comes to insider trading laws, these things are usually pretty solid. They've been around for a long time, and there are all sorts of things around messing with them and manipulating the market. Yet of course we know that it's just very easy to manipulate cryptocurrency markets, NFTs, and there are some similarities, and we see probably more so today these scenarios where stock prices are being sort of manipulated, but maybe en masse, as we saw happen with GameStop through Reddit.
And the question of is that stock market manipulation? And they say no, we're a community and we're talking about what we're doing. It's not stock market manipulation. It's just that everybody can see what we're talking about. And you can't really go into Reddit and arrest everybody on a subreddit.
And do you know who these people are? And it brings in some interesting questions around the anonymity that we have online, when there is that ability to go and manipulate things, to steal from people, to have an impact in one way or another. We heard. Last year, it was an individual that sent text messages to maybe a boyfriend, and convinced them to have to commit suicide in one way or another, right? So there's a technology piece in here. In that case, there wasn't a level of anonymity, so someone was all before the courts for it. But many times these things can be anonymous, and then
Especially
other times they're not. Elon Musk jumps on Twitter and does a tweet. If he were to do a tweet right now around a cryptocurrency, and we've certainly seen it in the past, he can cause the value of that to go up or the value of it to go down. And sometimes those sort of activities are done in such a way that, to me, if they were being done in relation to stocks, you would imagine a government entity to be stepping in some cases. Yet, those same rules don't apply.
And this is the fundamental question of decentralization, right? This is the sale point of cryptocurrencies, is that they're decentralized, but that also in many ways means deregulated, and so
to the extreme, right?
To the extreme.
Where you potentially can take away any government control to some degrees anyway.
And while while cryptocurrency is an optional thing, right? You can decide to buy an NFT or you can not. And people with excess amounts of money are going to buy fun new things regardless if it's an NFT or a Lamborghini, right? So whatever those exist, and people will spend money on them. But again, it's that they're choosing to get themselves into a space that is known to be deregulated, decentralized, and therefore risky. When we look at the metaverse, when we're talking about it becoming omnipresent, as I think many tech companies are hoping it will be, suddenly that becomes very scary. And if we're using things like NFTs to prove ownership of avatar clothing or things in the real world, well, in the virtual world, I should say, but they're decentralized and deregulated. And so then we enter this world of kind of strange, is it mandatory? Well, not really, but in the same way that having a phone isn't mandatory. So where do we then stand on that in terms of regulation? So, I think we've got a huge quagmire of legislation and regulation and issues to go through in the coming years as metaverse, NFTs, crypto, and all of this new digital world comes to fruition. So it'll be interesting to see how it happens.
Certainly will be. Now, on to the topic of autonomous technology, which we do love discussing. United Arab Emirates, their first driverless taxi trial has finished up, or the first phase of it. Over 2,500 passengers booked the service. It's called TXAI.
Pronounce it.
I wasn't going to try that, but it would be a lot easier if they moved the A before the X and just made it taxi. But cool name. They ran the trial end of 2021, and collected a whole lot of data. It's really interesting to me that we just continue to see more of these trials sort of spring up. I did wonder whether we were going to see a big break for a while. I think Singapore, the first ones there were, I don't know, years ago. So. These things are continuing certainly in parts of the US and so on, but we in some ways we don't seem closer or there yet as far as the car technology. But we know there is a lot of activity, a lot of things moving forward, on this front. So it will. Yeah. It will get there, but the form that it's in, I think, is still somewhat up in the air whether we're going to really see a move to the commercialised autonomous taxis that are very, very limited and structured to specific locations, as I've seen in, say, Las Vegas, and where you can go into an app and look for a vehicle and know that the service is is running in a particular area, and I remember that in Las Vegas. Who was it with? Not Uber, but one of the others, I think. Maybe an Uber. But when you've got the technology sitting there, it can work out whether to offer you a ride based on where you're getting picked up from and where you're going to. So you have to sort of fall in the sweet spot where the AI can actually do a reasonably consistent job in terms of the route and the pickup and drop off location. But the idea of getting to something that can just take you anywhere does seem as though we're still some way off on that front.
Yeah, there's still a few technological hurdles, I think. 5G, I think, is one of them, because the amount of sheer data that needs to go up and down to these cars is huge, and 4G just doesn't cut it.
Well, that seems to be debatable, because some of the companies are certainly doing it all on vehicle, and the connectivity is not essential for them to operate.
I think at scale, if you're talking about something that can take you anywhere you want to go, I think it's going to need to be connected. I think on vehicle isn't going to cut it, just because of all of the unexpected variables that can happen on the road. So you could have a map of New Zealand loaded in, but that map needs to be basically live updated, like Google Maps is, and also the amount of telemetry that the car actually has, and is all the information it's taking on board that then needs to be fed up to say, look out, there's something there, so how should I react? Request to the cloud, rather than trying to. Maybe it will end up all. Well,
we do seem to have the two schools of the two approaches. So one is 5G, and it's almost the reason that we need 5G, and the other is, I guess, what Intel are doing with Mobileye, what Tesla are doing with their FSD, Comma AI, another one, who are based on camera sensors and doing things, very much in the individual vehicle.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not quite sure exactly where these lines cross over, but it does seem that there is there are quite a number of players here that are not thinking that 5G has to be part of the answer, because they will look at the individual scenario and have an AI that's smart enough to make a decision based on what it sees. But and in fact, I don't like to talk about fact when it comes to Elon Musk, because he's been talking about the timing, and says he'll be surprised if they don't have their autonomous ride sharing sort of service from Tesla this year. Whereas now, after many years of hearing these things, I think I'll be the one that'll be coloured surprised if they were to deliver, such a service on any sort of broad basis in 2022. But it is fascinating watching the progress, and seeing some of these demo videos about what works and what doesn't. The Tesla side, and probably part of the reason I got into Tesla myself is because I wanted to experience a little bit of this and see how the technology's going. Of course, you don't need to have a Tesla to see that, and there are lots and lots of videos online of what their FSD tech is doing. And every few weeks I'll see something new that is quite encouraging in terms of the direction they're going, but there'll always be people sort of posting things that are discouraging too. Yeah,
I think in terms of autonomous personal vehicles, I actually think it's a different challenge to autonomous car services, unmanned car services, where you can pick up your phone and put a button and a car rolls up to your door and you're the only one in it. Even the UAE one you were talking about had a safety person in the car, just in case. So I don't know. I feel like, I could be completely wrong, and it's happened many times before that I've been completely wrong. So, but I feel like that connectivity piece is still pretty huge. But with the rate that AI processors are advancing at the moment, and just processors in general. I think that there's definitely a good possibility we'll start to see at least the first personalized, personal autonomous vehicle on the road pretty soon. Should be interesting.
I hope so. I think it'd be very cool.
Yeah.
Particularly if it can, and I think it probably only comes if it's going to be safer than an individual driver, than your typical driver. I've seen the Waymo ones tripping around in the States, and they've been going so long, it's almost head scratching that after so long that they're still very, very limited in terms of their service. But let's see how they go and the others go. But I mean they're certainly the leader in terms of the amount of vehicles that have been on the road, the amount of rides and so on that they do from that perspective. And then Tesla in the other position are in a sort of unique position of owning this full stack and having their technology and well over a million vehicles now. So
look,
lots to play out.
I'm one of those people who cannot wait to never have to drive again. So roll on.
Yeah, a couple of other things we wanted to jump into. I know we've sort of running out of time a little bit, but Sony is buying Bungie.
Yeah.
The developer of the Destiny games, originally. The original creator of Halo.
Yep.
Now, this had me sort of scratching my head a little bit because I recalled Microsoft buying Bungie.
Yes, familiar story. Yeah.
It's like, hold on. And then, they went back to being private again. And at the time I wondered, well, why would Microsoft sort of, do that? You can imagine there would be, there's a range of reasons why these sorts of things happen, and it wasn't that Microsoft weren't wanting to still publish, Bungie's games, but you can, potentially imagine that that their team might do their best work independently and without the shackles of a big corporate. So very interesting that this is happening now with Sony, but it does seem to be being done in a manner that is, in theory, doesn't leave them too shackled. We're talking about a roughly $5 billion New Zealand deal. I think it's 3.6 billion US dollars. It's obviously a lot smaller than what we heard about recently with Microsoft's Activision Blizzard, their acquisition of Activision Blizzard. That was, $68.7 billion
a little bit more
dollars.
Yeah.
So much bigger scale, but absolutely fascinating and. It seems to have a lot of potential. I'm sure there's a huge amount that's gone into this, so that you would imagine, so that it doesn't suffer the a fate as it did previously when Microsoft took it over. Unless they've been very smart to engineer it in so that it all falls apart again and and so on. But you imagine this has had a huge amount of thought gone into it.
Yeah, I'd think so. And if you look at kind of Sony as a company, I feel like Bungie might be a little bit of a better fit in terms of the kinds of the time and care and that Bungie put into their games. I mean, there might be some Destiny players out there who would argue with me about that. But as far as I can tell, Destiny 2 was a huge work that spent a lot of time coming to fruition. Was almost built from the ground up from Destiny, the first one, as opposed to something like Activision, which is a slightly different business model. Huge number of titles, Call of Duty and small changes, reskin. Bring out something that will hopefully get people excited for those small changes in the new skins, and I mean, I'm speaking as a Luddite of gaming. I love to sit on my couch alone and play single player games. But from my experience of Sony versus Microsoft, it's always kind of been that the Sony want the big games. They want I mean big in terms of content and exploration and those kinds of things, whereas Microsoft are more into the fast-paced and en masse games.
Interesting.
That's my experience.
Yeah,
My time as like I say, someone who will spend hundreds of hours playing Skyrim. So
cool. Well, we will certainly that'll be one to watch, and usually there's a fair period it takes for these sorts of things to happen. Now, you sent me a link to Airspeeder, the world's first racing series for manned flying electric cars. I'm just thinking, is this Star Wars?
Yeah, exactly.
What's happened? What decade am I really in?
I know.
This is fascinating. So you got to tell us what's going on here. Looks incredible. There's some pretty interesting materials up there at airspeeder.com.
Yeah, and I came across them doing a story about them last year, but they're an Australian company. But basically what they're aiming for is flying manned vehicles as a day-to-day thing. But they decided that the best way to get there is to do it through sports, because they saw what racing did for the car engineering, and they thought, well, if we can get an awesome flying electric vehicle racing circuit off the ground, then that could potentially bring a lot of engineering and excitement to flying cars, and maybe we'll see them on the road, I guess.
If you look back at Formula One and motorsport in its earlier years, there was a fair bit of death, shall we say?
Yes.
Right? There were accidents and death. Yeah, you can imagine by putting drones with people in them flying around at high speed.
They're not quite.
You can't
drones,
imagine it would go for they're not quite drones, are they? But in terms of drone-like vehicles that electric, and at airspeeder.com you can see some of the material there, and one of the ones just looks like it's got eight rotors on it, looks like a larger drone, but actually somebody sitting inside it, controlling it. So you can imagine this isn't necessarily going to end perfectly. That's
this is the thing. I think that when I was listening to them talk about it, what they were saying is that because safety is such a huge thing, that they want to be able to test it in this environment, because they know that there are these huge regulations on safety in racing, but that you are allowed to work to mitigate them and to do tests and things like that. So they'll have like collision avoidance technology, they'll have emergency landing technology, and all this other stuff that would work on, in theory, if all goes to plan, will work on these airspeeders to enable people to zoom around a course, however high in the air they are. The consequences of it going wrong, pretty dire, but hopefully, if it all goes well, what we'll see is some awesome manned aerial vehicles racing around in remote locations as they create this interesting and, quite frankly, awesome new sport. Fingers crossed it all works out for them.
Yeah, well, and interesting to compare them with what we know from the Star Wars world. Of course, you can go and have a look on Wikipedia and look up airspeeders on there to fill out the picture. a little bit more. But
Well,
very cool, very futuristic, and hopefully it does spur something and help move the technology forward.
Hopefully the drivers don't have to get a midichlorian count test before they jump into the pod racer. I mean airspeeder, excuse me.
All right. Well, hey, been great to catch up again, Ben. And first time for our podcast listeners though. So
it's been great.
Thank you for joining the New Zealand Tech Podcast, and we'll look forward to having you on again in the future. Now, where should people look if they're wanting to get in touch about news stories, or they're wanting to read some of your content?
Yeah, LinkedIn is always a good place. You can find me, Ben Moore. If you're Googling me, you do have to put -paint, because otherwise you'll end up with Benjamin Moore paints everywhere. But LinkedIn should be pretty easy to find me. I occasionally tweet on BenTM_journo, so you can have a look there as well. But yeah, get in touch. I'm keen to get to know a lot more people in the industry and make contact and really do a good job of representing our industry in the news media.
Excellent. That's great. Well, thanks for joining us, and thanks everyone for listening in. We'll look forward to catching you again on our next episode next week. All right. See ya.
Bye.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.